Hey there, Shift. I'm so happy to see you. It is a little weird that you followed me though. If this is your first time here, we're so pumped that you decided to join us. You guys can go ahead and scan this QR code and that'll give you all the information about us. And if you fill out the Connect card, you can scan this QR code or the one at the welcome table and that'll give you all the information you need about us. If you fill out the Connect card, we'll send you a little thank you from Starbucks. Dinner groups are starting, but don't worry, it's not too late. You can scan the QR code and fill out the form that we have on there and we'll get you plugged in. Dinner groups are a perfect way to make friends and meet new people, so don't miss it. Go ahead and start bringing back your generosity jars. We're saving up to give away means during the holiday season for anybody that needs it. Don't forget, like seriously, write it down, that our next online only service is May 29th. Seriously, write it down, because you're going to feel really dumb if you show up and no one's here after I told you to write it down. Alright, that's all I've got for you guys. Check out this Mother's Day video before we jump into week 3 of Jesus and.
Happy Mother's Day to everybody. We want to make sure that if today is a day of celebration, that we're going to be celebrating with you. If today is a day of remembrance, we want to remember with you. But we also see you if today is a hard day, right? If maybe you didn't have that relationship with your mom that you wanted. So we see you and we're with you. So we're just going to jump right into it, all right? We're going to jump right into it. There's a lot that's happening right now. It almost seems like every week there's just like this new thing that pops up to get everybody riled up, to get, there's stuff happening, and it almost feels like it just doesn't slow down. So I felt like there's no reason for us to tiptoe around what's happening, right? Because everybody's talking about stuff, what's happening at home. You're talking about it at work and school and all of the other third places. And regardless of where anybody stands on the issue, as I walk through this, let's just be aware of a space that's right. Unity is not uniformity. So seemingly, this week it all came out, leaked that SCOTUS may overturn Roe versus Wade. And I have lots of opinions on this. If you know me, I have lots of opinions on this. But I'm not sure that this is the place to give you my opinion. But as the pastor of Shift and as a local spiritual leader, I don't feel like it's something that I need to shy away from. But I will say that I do have a very nuanced view of abortion. I don't see it as a black and white either or issue, which unfortunately it gets painted in that light. Our culture does a really good job of creating these us versus them scenarios, and unfortunately the church all too often plays right into that. And all I saw this week, especially after it happened, was people jumping on social media and lots of words and capitalized, the caps lock and exclamation points, without regard for anybody else. Like no thought of the humanity involved, right? As if if something happens, the most important thing is that I get on social media and I put my opinions, my thoughts out there into the metaverse, because that's the most important. How are you going to know what I think about any given topic if I don't tell you what it is the moment that it's a hot topic, right? But what does that actually accomplish? I mean, what does that help? What kind of, what comes from that? Does it produce good fruit? And I would argue it doesn't. I think it does nothing but solidify the us versus them mentality. And so I just want to say, I'm grateful for you, Shift. I'm grateful because you hold space for hard questions and hard conversations. I'm grateful for you because you hold fast to the unity over uniformity, and that we can walk through this together. So if this is your first time, again, it's a doozy of a day, but that's fine. We're glad that you're here with us. I'm also thankful that I feel like as a community, whether you're in person or on the stream, as a community, you know that life is messy, and that when we get together and talk about these things, that it's going to be messy, and it's not a sitcom talk, right? It doesn't get wrapped up nice and neat in 22 minutes plus commercials. There's no, like, when we're done here, and we'll go through this, but when we're done here, I don't have any answers for you. Like, we're going to leave unresolved, and I think that's okay. It's funny how life works out sometimes, though, because as we were like laying out things, there's no way we knew like what was coming down the road when we laid all of what we were going to talk about out. And when we jump into the passage that we're going to, while it doesn't have anything to do, it's going to feel like it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. And in actuality, it really doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, okay? Unless you look at the context of what we're talking through, and the wisdom that Jesus imparts to us through this is very relevant to our current circumstance. So in Jesus' most famous collection of teachings called the Sermon on the Mount, there's several paragraphs, and in those paragraphs, there's one section where he says repeatedly, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," okay? And he's quoting something from like Old Testament law, and then he's telling them, but this is actually what it's supposed to mean. And we're going to take a look at a certain section, and it starts in 38. We'll have it up here on the board for you, or the TV, and it says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," which is super familiar, right? "But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you." So I told you that what this passage has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about, right? Unless, like I said, you look at the context of who he was talking to. Listen, whenever you read this stuff, you can never take what Jesus said or his teachings, and you can never remove them from the context, historical context, okay? You can't do that. That when you do that, you have really bad theology, which is, we see that rampant in the church today, all right? You also have to keep in mind who he's talking to and when he was doing it. All of those things are super important, okay? Because when we see this, we think about, oh, well, I'm not supposed to fight back, and no. You can't do that, because that's called an anachronism. It's reading our culture into what he's saying and trying to, no, that's not, maybe you can make that argument. But what Jesus was talking about, the people that he's talking to live under a brutal occupying force. The Roman Empire was especially cruel, all right? They achieved this Pax Romana, right? Like peace, Roman peace. They achieved that through cruelty and brutality, all right? They crucified people left and right, and they used that cruelty to show people that there's no way that you can come against the might of the Roman Empire. I have a picture for you. This is Emperor Tiberius. He was the emperor during the time of Jesus from 14 to 37 CE. So this is the man that is over the Roman Empire while Jesus is talking. the Roman historian, Suetonius, said that Tiberius was so cruel that in fact that there was not a single day that went by during his reign that there was not an execution. So every single day, according to this Roman historian, somebody died. Somebody was executed during his reign. All crimes were capital crimes with Tiberius. So this is when Jesus is teaching this, right? So then put yourself in their shoes. What Jesus just tells them helps in no way and is absolutely contrary to what you would actually want to do. I mean, we're Americans. Like, it really pisses us off whenever somebody tries to step on our individual freedoms. Like, it can just be a minor inconvenience. But if it's seen as, we're going to go nuts, okay? So put yourself in their shoes, and they're under this brutal regime, and then Jesus is like, I get it, turn the other cheek. If that Roman soldier requires you to walk 1 mile, I'm going to make you walk 2, which in actuality would be 4, because now you got to walk back, right? So not only is it not what you want to do, right? It's completely counter to anything you would humanly want to do, but reading it and understanding the context, it almost feels like a little bit of like salt in an open wound, right? Because they're making it worse, and now you're telling me that I got to make it worse on top of what they're doing? It just doesn't make sense to me. I think, regardless of what he's talking about, right? Because there are some people that would take this and say, okay, well, Jesus is saying that you can never use retributive violence. Never hit back for any reason. There's no reason to ever hit back. It's called pacifism, right? There are other people that's saying that he's using the shame culture to subvert the violence of the empire. That if you don't resist and others see this nonviolent resistance, then you're subverting and you're flipping the power structure, right? Maybe. And then others are saying, well, Jesus is using hyperbole, which is a teaching technique many rabbis use, and he used it multiple times. I don't know why he said what he said, all right? And it could be one or the other. It could be a mixture of the three, and probably some things that we don't actually know. But what we do know in this is completely counterintuitive. The things that he's teaching his followers is completely counterintuitive. So the question that we have to ask, right? The question we have to ask is why? Why would Jesus say this to them when he said it? Why is Jesus upending these hundreds of years of law texts? Because the texts that he's quoting are law texts from the Old Testament. And what they were designed to do was stop this ever-escalating cycle of revenge. So eye for an eye, if you poked at my eye in a fight and I lost my eye, before this law, I could come at you and keep coming at you and keep coming at you, right? And so then, okay, well, this is more humane. So it's an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. So that's what it's designed to do. But then Jesus comes along and just upends it. But why? Right? So I will say this, that I don't believe that Jesus wore God goggles. Okay? I don't believe that Jesus was some sort of Superman, that he could read your mind, that he knew all the things in advance as in his humanness. Part of the mystery of Jesus is that we believe, the Apostles' Creed, we believe that Jesus was 100% human, but also 100% divinity. All right? So he was 100% man, 100% God. Don't ask me how it works. Don't know. I choose to believe that. All right? We know that he didn't wear his God goggles because the early church leader Paul talks about this in his letter to the Philippian church. You can look it up later if you want to. It's in chapter 2. And it says that Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be hung on to, grasped. So he emptied himself of all of that and took on the form of a human being. So Jesus emptied himself of all of those things willingly. So at some point in time, God had to kind of like work through Jesus to do certain things, right? And at some point in time, God had to reveal to Jesus the coming destruction that's getting ready to happen, all right? He warns them about this coming destruction we'll talk about here in just a second. It's in Matthew's letter. It's in chapter 24, verse 34. And Jesus is warning them of what's getting ready to happen. He says, truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have taken place. Jesus, all of this apocalyptic literature or language that Jesus uses, he's not using it to warn us of some coming apocalypse. He's not warning us of some one world government that's coming, all right? He's warning them of the coming destruction. We know this because history tells us, and I'm going to nerd out here for a second, in 66 CE, rebels overtook and controlled Jerusalem until the year 70 CE. So for 4 years, these rebels overtook the Roman Empire in their capital, held control of the city for 4 years, and then future emperor, I just lost his name again, Titus. Emperor Titus, on April 14th of 70 CE, began a 5-month siege of the city of Jerusalem. 5-month siege. It leveled the city, completely destroyed the city, destroyed the Temple Mount, which was the symbolic home of God to the Jewish people, and then murdered 1.1 million men, women, and children. It was literally the end of the world. It was the end of the world. It was the end of their world. So, as we're walking through this, like what's the wisdom for us today? Right? Because we're not, the destruction's already happened. He's not talking to us, right? We're not under this brutal regime getting ready to kill us. So what do we have to worry about? You guys know me. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe JFK is showing up in Dealey Square to do whatever. I'm not a sky is falling kind of guy. But it doesn't take a lot of discernment. It doesn't take a lot to tell that that something has to change, that our culture is at a boiling point, right? We keep seeing these flashes. The summer of 2020 was one, right? The January insurrection was another flashpoint. It doesn't take a lot to see that humanity cannot continue, our culture cannot continue in the path that it's going without something happening, right? And I'm not going to say that there's this coming destruction or anything, but if we keep going down, I do believe that something's going to happen. I believe more often than not it's going to be an inner destruction. But I think that the words of Jesus here still matter because history continues to repeat itself. It's a cycle of violence that humanity just for whatever reason can never really unlearn. So hear my heart when I say this first sentence. It doesn't matter what you believe right now. It doesn't matter what you believe right now. It matters how you respond, how you treat others. Now, of course, 100%, I believe it matters what we think. I absolutely believe that, all right? But the problem is, right now, where we're at in our culture, we're putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, right? All right? So I can't change national policies. I can't create safety systems, safety nets for people. And at times that makes me feel useless, right? Like there's so much I want to do. I can remember growing up in youth group, and I can remember going to these big youth conferences as a student, but then also as a student pastor, where they would say things like, this generation, you're going to change the world. We've been saying that for years, right? You're world changers. Go out there and change the world. And yet here we are. And it just makes me feel helpless because no, I'm not. And how would I even accomplish something like that? And then what happens when I can't accomplish something like that? Then I'm a failure. But Jesus never called us to change the world. Jesus called us to love the world. Like Jesus called us to love people. And I know that probably sounds really simplistic and maybe a little bit naive, right? And I know that at times it sounds like a broken record, but I really believe that that's the answer. And I don't mean in like some sort of kumbaya kind of way, because while I say it's a simple answer, it's never easy. And it's even less easy when we start getting into things like turning the other cheek and loving your enemies. And that's super hard. Almost impossible. But Jesus over and over and over again calls us to live out this idea of love. I mean, he says it all the time. Treat others how you want to be treated. right? He even goes so far as to call that rule, the golden rule, the narrow road. Because right after it, if you look in Matthew, he says, treat others as you want to be treated. And then he says, the road is narrow. What's the road? How you treat people. Few will find it, but wide is the path to destruction, and many are on it. Why? Because we don't care about how we treat people. Treating people is the narrow road. And so he calls us to this thing over and over and over again. And there's a passage about love, and it's 1 Corinthians 13. A lot of people know this because it's read at like every freaking wedding ever, all right? And so we've turned it into this like, oh, lovey-dovey kind of passage. But it's a hard passage. So I want you to hear these words, these ancient words, in light of our current circumstance, okay? Everybody knows all of the stuff that's going on right now, and I want you to hear what Paul says. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Does that describe Twitter and Facebook? Holy cow. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all of my possessions and I hand over my body so that I may boast, but don't have love, I gain nothing. Now hear this. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. Prophesy just means speaking. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways, for the most part. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Now again, maybe it sounds cheesy or naive, but love is the way. Love is the narrow road. Loving our neighbors as ourselves, loving our enemies, as hard as that is the only way forward. Now, let me throw in one little caveat here. I do not see Jesus teaching us to stay in conversations or relationships that are dangerous to us physically, mentally, spiritually, or emotionally. Okay? I don't see that anywhere, and this is not a call to do that. All right? As a matter of fact, if anybody's in here is in that type of relationship, we will be the ones to help walk you through to get you out of that, whatever that means. All right? I do believe that God does call us to love people, and at times that means loving people from afar, right? Like loving somebody well, that's toxic, means loving them from over here, okay? I can love you like this. There are plenty of people I do, all right? But during this time period, there was this hope for a militaristic Messiah. They wanted to have God's kingdom by force. They wanted to take what they thought God was calling humanity to live in, and they wanted to force others to live that way. Does that sound familiar? They wanted to force it. And Jesus was like, no, you cannot live this way because this path leads to destruction. And so I believe if we don't change how we're living, if we don't change how we respond, that's the destruction that's going to come. You're seeing it happen within the church in real time. It's crumbling because we've lived this out for so long. So maybe you're sitting there thinking like, okay, I get it. Like that makes sense. But what do I do with that? Like what do I actually do with this? So when Paul talks about this idea of love, it's not passive. It's person to person. It's person to person. If I say I love you, right, and I don't do something about your circumstance, then can I actually say I love you? Like if I'm not working towards good fruit in your life or the life of our communities, then can we actually say we love anybody? Right? Because loving somebody means that I want for you exactly what I want for me. So if I want access for me to something, then I want it for you. If I have this thing and this is what I want for myself and my family, I want the same thing for you. That's what that means, right? And you can look in almost any good fruit change movement throughout history. Just take American history, and they lived this out. The suffrage movement, right? They got up and they worked for it. They wanted access to voting for women, right? So they did something. I love you like I love me, and so we're going to go this way. It wasn't passive. They worked towards something. The abolitionist movement, right? They saw somebody in need. I got to love you like I love myself, so I want you to have freedom, right? Civil rights did and continues to follow this way. Equality for LGBTQ plus did this and continues to. So this idea that love is passive, love is something that we just sit on the sidelines and, oh, I love you. No. Love is this idea of us getting up off the sidelines and compelling us to action, right? We talk about compassion all the time. It's that when Jesus had compassion, it's the Greek word, it's my favorite Greek word, splagnizomai. Splagnizomai. And it means to yearn with your guts. It means to want. It's a call to action. It's like I see something and I can't just sit on the sidelines and not do something. I have to jump in. And that's what it's calling us to. So maybe when Jesus calls us to this countercultural living, right? Maybe the wisdom of these "you have heard it said, but I say to you" passages for us in the here and now is, what if turning the other cheek for us is more along the lines of not investing and wasting energy into social media responses, but then investing that energy and into actions that produce good fruit? What if it's not, I need to make sure that you hear me, you know my opinion on every little thing, and I'm going to argue with it. I'm going to argue till you see me. Instead of wasting energy doing that, it's volunteering somewhere or it's advocating for something. And I can't tell you what that is because that's your role, right? If I love you but don't fight for you, don't do anything about your circumstances, then do I actually love you? So there's no easy way to wrap this up, right? There's no do these three things and everything's fine, which is really never the case. We'll give you some 3 points that you can remember sometimes. And it's typically 3, just as a side note. It's a thing. Even if you watch TED Talks, there's usually 3. It's a whole science, so you'll listen. It's a system of control, people. It's the Matrix. But I think that we're just going to leave this place. It's just in an uncomfortable spot because there's really no one answer. Like, we're going to leave this unresolved, and I think that that's okay. We don't enjoy that very much, but maybe that's part of what Jesus is talking about here, right? Because nothing that he says brings resolution to anything that's happening to them. Maybe part of what we have to do today is sit in the unresolved issue. Like, we have to own that it is uncomfortable to be here, and maybe we have to just be here. We don't, as Americans, we do not enjoy doing that. But maybe we just need to be here and to understand that this is not okay. That where we are right now as a culture, this isn't normal. And it's not okay. And if we can recognize that, right, then maybe that's that first step of moving towards something different. So every week we take these little emblems, right? And we reflect on the moment, or we take a moment to reflect on the wisdom that Jesus gives us, right? The wisdom of his teachings. And so I really want to take a moment and do that today, to just take a moment. And I know that this probably is not the Mother's Day talk you thought you were going to get, and I would have much rather given one of those because I love my mama. But stuff is going on, and we need to talk about it. So these little emblems are a constant reminder for us to live this third way, to live differently, right? To partner with God in doing these things. This is how the early church leader Paul said it, and this is where we're going to end right here. It says, for in him all the fullness of, him is Jesus, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood on his cross. And so these little emblems are our call to be a part of this reconciliation of all things. Like, we get to participate in this. And it can be really hard, right? Because sometimes I want to punch back. Because bad fruit, let's be honest, sometimes bad fruit feels really good. But the way of Jesus is different. It calls for different. Reconciliation, love, calls for different. Love is what drove Jesus to willingly lay down his life, right, for the healing of creation. He didn't just say, I love you, and give you a high five and great job. No, he did something about it. It's his love that propelled him to the cross and the grave and the resurrection. And now because of that, then we can participate in that. That's what we're called to do. So what I want to do this morning is I want to take an actual few moments to really think through that. Like, what does that mean in light of our current circumstance collectively? Like, what does it mean to be a part of reconciliation with people? What does it mean to actually love others? And how are you personally called to bring good fruit to those around you? So let's pray. God, I just want to lift up all the things, all the stuff. And as we get ready to take these little emblems, God, I pray that we would just take a moment to reflect on what it means to turn the other cheek in this circumstance. What does it mean to live counterculturally in what's happening? How do we work for the betterment of others in light of what you told us? And God, I realize that that's going to look different for different people, and that's okay. And that different people sitting in this room and watching this stream feel differently about this, and that's okay. But Lord, one thing that we can't feel different about is your call for us to love. And so, God, I pray that as we walk through this moment of silence together, just being in our heads and thinking through this, God, I pray that you would guide that maybe there are next steps that we have to take. And whether that's personally or corporately, maybe it's big steps or small steps. God, I pray that these emblems, that your love, your sacrifice, your healing would propel us to those things. And God, I pray that we would be a people that our community knows for bringing good fruit. Even in really hard circumstances like this that we're facing, that's what we would be about. Jesus, we're thankful, and it's your name we pray. Amen.